Welcome to Mortgage Sales Playbook. I'm Pat Sherlock, your host. My podcasts are where top producers, sales leaders, and industry experts share strategies that drive real sales success. No fluff, just actionable insights to help you master the art of selling and leading. Today, we have a great topic, winning strategies in the retention during a merger. It's so important today, especially with so much going on in our industry. And I have the perfect person. That's Jerry Rader. Jerry is Senior Vice President at ALCOVA. He's been in our mortgage business for a long time, Academy and some other firms. But more importantly, he owned his own firm for over 18 years and sold it back in the day. And so, Jerry, great to have you with us.
Thanks, Pat. Happy to be here.
Well, let's start off with a basic question, which is how did you get into our mortgage lending world?
Yeah, back in 1994, somebody told me I'd be a great loan officer. Had no idea what that meant, but I went and got myself an interview with a local broker and figured it out from there.
That's kind of interesting. And so you didn't go to college to be a mortgage lender?
One of the few, I think.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it was not at all on my radar screen.
Yeah, for all of us, that's always the case. And that's why I always ask that question, because it's always interesting to hear what people have to say. So, talk about since you've been in our worlds for a long time, talk about this issue of what issues you think lenders should be addressing that haven't been addressing.
Yeah, I think, there are a couple that come to mind. It's the what I would call tech adoption on the front line.
Mm.
The big companies, there are a handful of names we could throw out there that seem to do it well, but
Hmm.
what I call the real IMB models where they have street originators, there seems to be a real gap between the haves and the have-nots. And so, especially small to mid-market size companies,
Hmm.
being able to not just say they adopt it, but actually bring it right to the consumer and effectively use it in their sales
Right.
process is a big miss, I think, number one. And then AI, everybody talks about it, but there are a few companies who really understand it and don't feel threatened by it and actually have what I call a systemic plan to leverage it in a really meaningful way. So those would be the two areas I think that a lot of
Hmm.
IMBs are just looking, or maybe not, for a way to leverage that.
Hmm. Well, I agree with you, and we'll have you come back and talk about that issue because that is a big issue, and I see it every day myself. So, talk about from your viewpoint, what are some priorities that the lender has for this year?
Yeah, well, so we stop short of setting yearly goals, but we have two or three what we call big rock goals that we kind of laid out there. Our first is we call it 25 and 25. In 3 years from now, Alcova turns 25 years old. It's our 25th anniversary.
Hmm.
And our goal by that year is to annually be impacting 25,000 families, whether that's through origination, whether that's through our servicing, whether that's
Hmm.
through our charitable investment and engagement through our branch partners. Those are the areas, those are our kind of three big rock goals. And then each year we set some priorities on how we're going to move the ball
Hmm.
downfield towards those big goals, but those would be our kind of our big goals that we continually hold in front of our originators.
Well, that's a pretty substantial goal. So I'm excited to hear how you're doing when we go more towards the end of the year, because that's 25,000 households. Wow, that's a large challenge for sure.
Yeah, we still have 3 years to get there, but I'm like, we're behind the curve a little bit, guys, so we got to step it up.
Well, let's be positive,
That's
and it's
right.
around the corner.
That's
So,
right.
anyway, so let's talk about our topic today, especially with all of the mergers going on that we see. And this whole issue, and why I was so interested to talk to you is that you had your own company for 18 years, you sold it, you went through a transition, retaining the people, and how you did that. I think lenders would be very much interested to see how you did it. So, talk about I guess from the first part, you decided to sell your business. How did you handle that notification to your employees? And what did you do precisely from a standpoint of keeping them engaged so they would stay?
Sure. Well, we held the news very closely until we were ready to break
Hmm.
it. So it was kind of a two-step process. There was about a week of engagement with my senior leadership team where I just got them together and walked them through the story and why I thought this was good for our future together. But then we had about 175 employees at the time and
Hmm.
probably in 17 different locations. And so I
Hmm.
literally got on an airplane and was in multiple cities each day where I sat down and just in person walked people through that and walked them through the decision and then asked them, begged them to hold the information so I could give the same courtesy to the other groups
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
ability to do that in person. So as we got to the end of that week, I employed one of our other executives to kind of help wrap that up. But it was
Hmm.
definitely, it was not the phone call, get everybody in a conference room around a phone approach. I really went for the personal approach because I thought it was important.
So talk about, were they surprised that this was happening? Were they caught off guard? Or did they kind of see the tea leaves, and was that something that raised some of their credibility issues? Or I know that you went around to tell them, but I'm just curious, were they surprised or not?
Very. It's the process started. We were not looking to be acquired. Somebody connected us to the company that acquired us, and I was not interested. I was not looking, but I agreed to give them 1 hour to talk to me, and that started an 11-month dialogue with them. So yeah, our team was honestly floored. They were not expecting that. We had built a very close-knit group, and I really believed that this was a very good next right step for both them and the company. But there was a lot of surprise, consternation, less than initial happy responses, dare I
Okay,
say.
right.
Yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of hard conversations for an extended period of time.
So did they feel betrayed in some way?
I think initially some of them did. I think some got it and just understood the story. And that's really important. I talk about that when people ask me about it. It's really important to understand yourself. What is the story and why is this better?
Hmm.
Why the company that's acquiring, the company that's being acquired, why are those two organizations better together? And you can't just wing that. You can't just kind of make that up on the fly. But yeah, there were some people who just really struggled with the decision and really came at me pretty hard. And we had some pretty direct conversations through that journey.
So let's talk about when you moved to the company. I know you were talking about how you were able to retain those individuals, and obviously it started out where there was a lot of disbelief, and then it moved forward. So what happened between the time that they were notified and before actually the sale got completed? Because that's the crunch period, because that's when people, if they're not buying in, they're going to move on, and you're left with, well, I didn't really have much to sell because they all left me. So,
Yeah, well, first of all, we designed the rollout so that there was only about a 2 week period from notification to
oh,
actual
okay. Hmm.
execution. As I had said, we had talked between Corridor and SWBC for about 11 months prior to that, but we didn't leave a lot of time in between me starting the conversation process with the rank and
Hmm.
file and to it actually being executed,
Hmm.
with SWBC. So there was a short amount of time, but people, they're not, people aren't property. They can leave at any point during that
Sure.
process.
Correct.
And so what we did in that process, was super important as we
Hmm.
told that story.
So when you went there and you told them, so this 2 week period, you're notifying them, was there any other types of things that you did before the actual date of acquisition occurred? Or in other words, when the merger occurred?
Sure. Yeah, we were really strategic about coming up with a timeline and a plan together with SWBC. We worked really hard to put that together. We worked really hard to get their leadership team then
Hmm.
flew in. And we had a series of town halls in different parts of the country with myself and our leadership team and their leadership team. We also put together a plan that would let our team participate in some of the upside of the sale of the company. We recognized that our growth from 8 employees as a broker in 2000 to 170 plus employees with all agency approvals. That wasn't just because of me, and it wasn't just because of a couple of people. It was because there were a lot of people who had poured a lot of energy into the organization. So
Hmm.
when we put the deal together, we really tried to make sure that we gave opportunities for our originators as well as some of our key leaders to participate in some of the upside from the sale of the organization. And so that, I think, along with being willing to engage in really hard conversations over and over with people, sometimes multiple times with one person, helped us
Hmm.
come together with a plan that was well thought out, well constructed. It shifted along the way. No plan is perfect. You line up and you call the first play, and then the plan's out the
Hmm.
window. But
Hmm.
there was definitely a lot of energy from a lot of leadership on our side and SWBC's part to make it successful.
So, what were the types of questions as you look back? What were the concerns that the employees, the 175 people, had? What did they really kind of fall into? What was it that you were trying to convince them about?
I think some of it was sometimes it was spoken, but most of the time it was unspoken. The overarching question that what in either directly or indirectly that was asked was, okay, you sold us this vision for 18 years or 15 years or however many years.
Yeah,
Now you're going to take your money and ride off into the sunset. What about us? And
correct.
so that was in many different ways. That was the question. That was the elephant in the room. That was the thing I had to address and to be honest
Hmm.
about
Hmm.
why I thought this was good, but then also why this wasn't me taking a payday and then in 6 months I'm gone type
Hmm.
of a situation. And I'll probably get to that in a little bit here, but I would say what you do prior to the announcement and the actual integration is important, but what you do after that's even more important.
Right. Well, let's talk about that because that's ultimately the big issue. And I'm curious from the point that you had these conversations to when the sale actually happened, what did you have people leave at that point in between?
No, we didn't actually. And again, it was a team effort for sure. But one of the things I'm proudest of is of all of our originators that went over, we only had one person choose not to go out of our
Hmm.
entire origination team. And then about 4 or 5 months into being at SWBC, we had a second originator leave out of a
Okay.
total of about 80 originators, 85 originators. But then he came back about 9 months later. So, we didn't have a lot of attrition, really none to speak of at all. And then we were able to, both through effort as well as there was some market influences that happened, the thing called COVID and that. But we were able to grow another 40 or 50 originators after joining SWBC over the next couple of years. So it was a real,
Hmm.
there wasn't a lot of attrition either leading up to or after or post.
So normally people try to buy the length of time that they're going to stay. And it sounds like, did you end up doing that or how did that actually work?
Yeah, so what we did is we put together some incentive packages for some of our senior people to participate in the actual earnout. And then
Hmm.
we also implemented a plan for our originators that measured production, and we set kind of some minimum thresholds for them to be able to participate, but almost everyone hit those thresholds. And so there was a 9 month and an 18 month
Hmm.
payday, if you will, for originators who chose to stay and hit those thresholds where they could, in essence, earn some of that earnout that we were experiencing as part of the deal. And it
Hmm.
proved to be one of the things as I talked to originators, it was the thing that kind of glued them in and gave and encouraged them to
Hmm.
give the new opportunity a chance. Because that's really
Yeah,
what it's about. It's about
sure.
getting people to stick around long enough to realize that
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I was used to a blue button. It's a red button, but that's not the end of the world. We were careful to craft something that was meaningful for them, would move the needle for them, but would more importantly give them the opportunity to see what I saw in the opportunity and to stick around long enough to experience that. So,
So talk about once you joined, obviously the transition period is also a highly risky period because they have to learn a new system, they got to learn a whole bunch of different stuff. How was that all handled
well, and on top of that, Pat, their phone is blowing up because every recruiter who's
in
heard
the
about it
world?
now is like dialing them up to tell them why their world is ending. And
Yeah.
we talk about trigger leads for our customers. Well, when you go through when you go
Yeah,
through a transition, that's its own form of trigger leads, and so you
sure.
you have
Very
to
true.
to combat that. But yeah, that was And I'm sorry, I lost track of that. What was the
Well,
second part of that
how
question?
did you handle that transition? Once you've now have moved to the new company, that's just a risky period of time just
Yep.
because people are soliciting them just for all the reasons you're talking about. How were you able to buy that time is what it boils down to. Like, what was it that you talked on before the acquisition, but then now it's actually happened? And you just mentioned, every recruiter in the world will be sourcing them. And so, was there anything that was done differently, or something that you found very successful?
Yeah, so we put with the help of our marketing team on both ours, who became part of the larger company's marketing team, we put together what I would call like we called it internally our retention book. But it was literally a marketing piece that kind of highlighted all the changes and all the things that
Hmm.
we thought that they would benefit from by staying a part of this experiment, because that's what every transaction is like this. It's an experiment.
Sure, sure.
But we had regular feedback sessions and town hall meetings after the transition.
Okay.
We developed a response team that was part of our leadership and part of SWBC's leadership. So it was kind of like a triage team or a concierge
Mhm.
team. So we could immediately move in if there was any issues or problems or things like that. We could address it and we could solve it in real time. We could reprogram, systems if needed.
Okay.
We set up a transition period where we, in essence, ran a parallel system to theirs. So it wasn't like they walked in on day one and suddenly everything was changed and nobody knew where the coffee was or how to get into Helix Point, I mean, in Compass,
Yeah.
all those things. So it was a very thoughtful, and then we received a lot of feedback along the way, from our team
Hmm.
as we walked through that. But some other things that we did really intentionally that we talked about and that people gave us feedback later on and said that was really important to us. We set it up with SWBC so that as part of the deal, they recognized all the seniority that our people had acquired under Corridor. So it wasn't like you were brand new, walking in the door. I mean, even though you were, if you had 12 years of seniority with Corridor, you now had
Hmm.
12 years of seniority with SWBC. That meant that if you were getting 3 or 4 weeks of vacation, you still got 3 or 4 weeks of vacation.
Hmm.
That also meant that for our salespeople who had achieved, President's Club trip status and stuff like that, that got honored under SWBC's President Club, and
Hmm.
their trip was better than ours, so that wasn't a bad thing either. But so, being thoughtful about little things like that and
Hmm.
recognizing people as human beings with dignity and recognizing that, hey, they're going through. I had 11 months to think about this. They had like 11 days to think about this. And so
Hmm.
recognizing there was a lot of fear and a lot of wondering what ifs by looking for ways to put human touches on the deal that said, hey, we recognize what you've done at Corridor, and that's just not all lost. We're going to carry that legacy with us into this new opportunity was and feedback I got from a lot of folks after the fact was very, very um,
Hmm.
special to
Hmm.
them.
So the response team, talk about what that involved. Was it just system orientated, or how was it that, what were they actually doing?
It was systems, it was license transfers, we had
Hmm.
some of our team stay back and close out the pipeline under the old company while the new pipeline got started in a new company. So there was a lot of cross communication between technologies.
Hmm.
That was
Hmm.
one thing that we were careful about when we chose SWBC, or when they chose us, I guess. We shared 18 of the 20 major platforms, whether it was Encompass, whether it was, our front end
Hmm.
system facing the customer.
Yeah.
There was a lot of synergies there, but there was still, hey, we've got to get all the old data from over here and all the customer bases over here, and we've got to get them into new systems, and we've got to maintain and close out the old pipeline while we're starting a new pipeline. So that team was really, that was an integration team that really tried to make sure that we connected all those pieces.
Was it the old company handling this response team, or was it the new company actually doing their part with
It
it?
was a combination. We had some people that stayed behind. We went to them and said, "Hey, we're going to bring you, but we'd like to ask you to stay behind." There were some originators we had to leave behind and ask them to stay there because we needed licensed originators to stay on that side of the platform. So that was dangerous, but we made the ask for some key people to do that. And so it was a combination of both our, corridor employees and SWBC employees working together.
And so, what was the length of time? I'm curious to your answer to this of how long did it take after the sale happened that everything really kind of calmed down?
Oh wow. Looking back at that, I would say it was probably, and it was different for each person, but
Sure,
I would
sure.
say it was somewhere between 9 and 15 months before everybody felt like, okay, we're home. Wait, this is good.
Did that surprise you? I'm curious. Did you think it would be sooner or did you
I
think
thought it
it?
would be sooner. I thought it would be
Okay.
sooner, honestly. I'm a person, I like change. I'm one of those weird people that,
Yeah,
that I'm always looking for ways to make things better. And so there were times where my executive coach had to tell me, Jerry, you just have to have patience because,
yeah,
people move at their own pace and you've got to let them do that.
yeah. So, what percentage took the 15 months and what percentage took the 9 months? I'm curious.
I would say probably 2/3 of the people fell into
Were,
that 6 to 9 month category, and probably
uh,
a third of them took 15 months, and there were probably a couple that took 24 months.
Well, that's another session. We'll talk about them
Yeah.
later. So anyway, but time has flown by. So if you could share with our listeners today some of the important points that you learned when the sale happens, getting the people to come with you was really not, it's probably your number one challenge.
Yeah, it is the number one challenge. And, I think making sure that we had some other unsolicited bids that were better money, but we listened to the one from SWBC because it was just a better fit for our
Hmm.
team. And that I think after they got through that, our team recognized that and they respected that. And that was probably that coupled with recognizing they were real people and we treated them like real
Hmm.
human beings was probably the big takeaway for us as the win.
Right. You weren't sending just emails out making the
No,
announcement,
no.
which is a big mistake. I see a lot of companies doing that. Anything else you want to share, Jerry, with our listeners today?
I think that people are often lost in the shuffle of corporate
Mhm.
restructuring, and we do that at our own peril. And I think remembering that the people who got us where we are and allow us this opportunity to do this are really the key stakeholders in what's happening. And so that's probably my charge to anybody who's considering this. That's
Right. Well, Jerry, I know you're going to get lots of phone calls, so if you could share your contact information, that would be
sure.
great.
Yeah, my email address is the letter J, Rader, Rader, at Alcova, ALCOVA.com.
Hmm.
And my number is 443-745-2301. I'm a loan officer at heart, so I answer that phone. It's at my hip all the time. So,
Well, I know you'll get a lot of calls, and I want to thank you for sharing all your wisdom today. And I want to thank our listeners for tuning in and certainly subscribe to our podcast. We'd love to have you join us. Thanks so much, Jerry.
thanks, Pat.
That's a wrap for this episode. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your team. Want more proven sales strategies? Visit patsherlock.com for expert resources, coaching, and sales training. Until next time, keep selling smarter and not harder.